What it do, YouTube? This your girl Deborah.7 coming live and direct from my kitchen. This morning, I want to talk about a conversation I had yesterday. I tried to remember my relevant conversations so I can repeat them when I get on YouTube. So I have wonderful conversations every day, ponder the meaning of life and everything. We were talking about just being in the video I did about the state of being and just being. And there has always been this prerequisite for enlightenment in Eastern philosophies, which is the dissolvement of the ego. And, they would say things like, I would read things like, once you reach enlightenment, you disappear. And, it was very scary, I might add. I was like, I don't want to go nowhere. Now that I have gotten to a certain maturity level in my spiritual path, I understand what they mean. It's a realization of truth about who you really are. And it's a couple of pathways that you can get that way. I've done videos on this. You can reach enlightenment through all type of different vehicles. Realizing that self is such a self journey, I think the number one biggest thing is to find what works for you. Certain things don't work for everybody. My path was really rooted in knowing myself. It was almost like predetermined fate for me, because I never had a filter of a projected self-image of this is what I want you to think that I am. I never had that. So it was like I was so open that I didn't really know that I was aware of who I was already. And I'm going to tell y'all a story. So when I was in grammar school, I was a weird child, right? I liked being very creative, visually, musically. I liked the gift of expression. I expressed myself in what I wore, how I talked, what I did, So I get to high school, and I'm this, skinny kid with these Coke bottle glasses. And right when I got to high school, I was really into androgyny, men's fashion, wife beaters. This was long before this got popular. This was in 1991. Wife beaters weren't popular then. I wore wife beaters, a baggy jeans, and a man's blazer, or a t-shirt and a big oversized trench coat, and an army jacket or something like that. And, when I woke up in the morning, I had good self-esteem about myself. So when I got dressed and looked in the mirror, I dressed for myself and what I wanted to see myself in. Well, when I got to high school, it was like I was a butterfly trying to fit myself into a cocoon, because everybody else was still in a cocoon, or they were caterpillars. And everybody, rejected me. Like, the frick are you doing? You're not supposed to dress like that. You're supposed to dress like us. And, instead of me going, well, this is me, I went, I am? Oh, okay, let me do what y'all doing. Now, I never all the way conformed, and I guess I never let a lot of conditioning seep into me and get rooted. There is some conditioning that's still rooted there, such as not thinking myself worthy of knowing the truth about myself. And that comes from the conditioning of Christianity, telling you that you're born into original sin and you're a dirty wretch. And, that fear and that guilt and that shame that gets put on you. But I understand the reason why it gets put on you. It gets put on you in order to keep you humble. Because if you don't have that humility, then your ego will get so inflated that it will get out of control. So when Satan told Eve that God didn't want her to eat the fruit because she would be like a God, to an extent, was true and not true at the same time. The reason why is she was already like a God. She just didn't have that self-awareness. When she ate, she became self-aware. Once she became self-aware, all type of shit, you know, she was aware of all the shit that was getting piled up on that. It's like if you have a clean stack of notebook paper, and as long as it's in a plastic case, it's a clean stack of notebook paper. You know, it is what it is. But as soon as you crack open that plastic, dirt can get on top of it. Somebody can write on it. All these things. Basically, what she did was she just cracked open the plastic. Now, at the end of the day, she's still a sheet of notebook paper. But since she got written on so much, what she began to do is identify with the scribble scrabble instead of the sheet of notebook paper. That was what the Bible meant by the essence of original sin. You begin to disconnect with your true self. Now you're diving into the world of ego. I've always said the reason I don't go to church is because church doesn't have too much of an emphasis on how to get rid of the ego. The funny part is I read books that said, you have to do this to get rid of the ego. You have to do this to get rid of the ego. Oh, this is my favorite. You know, you have to kill the ego. I've heard pastors say you got to kill the self. You got to kill the ego in order for you to be able to serve God, which is absolute truth. The problem is it's not an easy thing to do, which is why most people can't do it, because there's so much guilt behind them. There's so much shame behind them. There's so much things that they buried instead of dealing with, that the moment you go inward, the first thing that you're faced with is the shit that you're trying to forget. The shit about you that you don't like. The game and the shame and the guilt of things that you've done that you don't agree with. Or, you know, the fear of how you'll be perceived by other people. All of those things are right there. Lucky for me, I didn't really have that right there because I've always kind of tried to process. What? You want to come up here? You want to come up here? I'm sorry, I got one of the little ones down here. I've always tried to process shame, guilt, you know, whatever negative emotion popped up. So I don't have a lot built up in me. Because I go through these processes, and it's a part of knowing self. It's like, well, you know, do I agree with this or don't I? Okay, baby. All right. Here. I'm sorry, y'all. She been interrupting my video for 3 days. They getting to the point where they super active and they want mommy to play with them. So you get to a point where you have to process those things and accept yourself for yourself. And I think that's the hardest thing for people to do, because even that was the hardest thing for me to do, was accept self for self. You know, you can't accept ego for what it is and then expect to go on to higher self. Because I didn't accept self for self because I was always trying to be better, trying to be a better self, trying to create my perception of self as a better perception to be presented to others, you know, or to be presented to self. I've always strived to be a perfectionist. I have to be the best mother, the best wife, you know, within the context of staying true to myself. I just came to the realization that that's exactly what you're supposed to be doing. You know, at the end of the day, be the best you can be, but stay true to self. You know, self has flaws. Self has hang-ups. These are hang-ups that self needs to work on. This is a very personal journey for each person. And the journey, you can't accept others as self until you accept self as self, is my point. When I begin to feel like my skin is disappearing because it feels like I'm merging with higher self. And I did fight the process because I felt like it was supposed to look a certain way. Like I'm supposed to wear a toga and some sandals and, you know, be meditating all the time in order to merge self with higher self. Like there were certain aspects of my personality I felt like I need to leave behind. You know, the funny thing is when I became a minister, I felt the same way. I felt like I can't listen to Jay-Z no more. I'm a minister. That's why ultimately I had to leave that because I was like, I got to be true to self. Self, when I first began my ministry journey, self was like, nigga, you drink, smoke, cuss, and fuck too much to be a damn minister. You can't be telling the people about what God wants them to do, and you ain't doing what God wants them to do. But in the innermost sanctum of self felt like certain things was okay for me to do, even though it went against all the teachings. Like, hey, I can fuck every now and again as long as I'm not a hoe. I can drink every now and again as long as I don't get drunk. As long as I take care of my body, I can eat some fried chicken every now and again. You know, I realized everything was in moderation and I was completely not lining up with the teachings of the church or what they was teaching me. So when I began to feel this power of knowing who self is, I felt like, oh, I need to do something. Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. Oh, I can't make YouTube videos no more about talking about bullshit because all the spiritual people on my channel are going to be like judging me. Oh, you're not supposed to be talking about titties and ass and fat bitches and stupid ass niggas and fucking and stuff. Because you're self, your higher self, your spiritual being. You're supposed to chant, meditate, and only think about positive things. Well, to me, those are positive things. And realizing that self is quite uniqueness and self has infinite potential, you know, and at the root of the ego is, at the root of the I, which is the perception, is the spirit, which is the being. So when you start identifying with the spirit, you realize you don't have to do. The ego does this, does that. Now, let me tell you the paradox of that. In order for you to interact as a human being, you have to utilize ego. Ego never quite disappears. I have to refer to myself as I like peanut butter and jelly, in order to get you to relate to the perception of I. So I have to go into the ego. I have to go into the ego to play the certain roles that my life plays out to have in it. I'm a mother. I'm a nurse. This is not who I am. These are roles that I play. See, what are you doing? No. No. These are roles that I play. Once I begin to know self at the core of self, I realized, I realized what the gurus and the spiritual people were saying when they were saying that's not who you are. I said, okay, I'm not a nurse. That's the role that self plays. I'm not a mother. That's the role that self plays. But what people do is they identify with the role as self, and then it becomes all they know that they are. You know, I'm a good person. Even in that, that's a role that I play. That's a role that I choose to play at this point. I could easily be an evil person because it's a choice. It's a choice that is driven by a compelling push, you know, subliminal behind you push to be. It's that what resonates to you and what draws you, you know, that you end up relating to, gravitating towards, and putting on, you know, putting it into your spiritual body and carrying it and portraying it and pushing it outward. But it's not really you. That's just a role that you're playing. You are pure, unadulterated, unidentified information and energy. Just infinite. Infinite. That is what you really are. You is a piece of the all that is, that has always existed and always will exist. This life is just a tiny smidget of that journey. But if you choose to say, hey, while I'm here, I'm going to take this role and I'm going to play it out to the fullest. By all means, you know, I had the misconception that I had to deny that part of me. Oh, I can't. I'm telling y'all, I was confused. I was confused. I was like, oh, I can't dress anymore. I can't, you know, kick it anymore because these are not important parts of the journey. The journey is about, you know, collecting information and learning and growing. And this is the totally, I have to discard this. No, this is a part of the journey too. Because this is an aspect that I've gravitated towards, that I'm resonating with. I think at the end of the day, once I accepted self for self, I mean, I got a video called Acceptance is the Key. But it's just on so much of a bigger scale because people don't accept themselves for who they are. They feel like they're supposed to be a certain way. They strive to be that certain way. And, you know, if that don't work, then, you know, they fake it till they make it. That's basically. They fake it. You know, you can think that this is how I am, you know, until I get there, which is nothing wrong with that. I was reading this definition of ego earlier, and when people say, oh, you got a big ego, they're making the word ego synonymous with being conceited or being prideful or being full of themselves. But that's not what I mean by ego when I say it. It is what you believe about yourself, what you tell yourself about yourself, what you think about yourself, what you feel about yourself, and how you picture yourself. It's self-image. It is self-perception. It is personality traits. They all contribute to the lower self, the lower I, the lower ego. How you, what circumstances you were raised under, which is crazy because people take credit for that. Like, and they almost feel like they're better than somebody else when they don't pick their own circumstances, or at least they don't remember that they picked those circumstances. The ego becomes the main focal point when you forget everything else. Some people can remember. I'll give you an example. Tupac knew he was going to live a short life. He probably programmed that in himself before he got here and just forgot after he got here. But part of him found that so familiar, the reality of not being here that long, that he identified with it. You can call it a self-fulfilled prophecy, which is, you want to hear something else funny? When I was younger, the doctors told me I would never have children. I had a severe case of endometriosis. You know, all type of, you know, for those who don't know what that is, it was very painful. Went to the doctor as a teenager. Doctors told me I would never have children, right? Moved out of my parents' house at 17. Got with my oldest daughter's father. We lived together for 4 years. Y'all know, you know, we was teenagers. We was fucking like rabbits. No protection, because the doctors told me I couldn't have no babies any doggone way. I never pictured in my head that I would be a mother. This was just probably the catalyst that I needed to actually have the amount of children I had. I honestly feel like this was pre-programmed before I even got here. Got pregnant, had a miscarriage. Once I got the, you know, the notion that I could harbor a child in me, immediately got pregnant again a month later. I had my daughter Asia. My first pregnancy, I was sick, but all my pregnancies got progressively worse. So imagine if the worst pregnancy was the first pregnancy, I wouldn't have had any more kids. Okay, if I would have had these twins first, wouldn't have had no more children because I was awful. But my first pregnancy was straight. I got to chill. You know, first daughter, first baby, perfect baby. When I say perfect baby, hardly ever cried. I just knew all my babies would be like that. Each child was progressively worse. Until I get to this point where I'm making this video with this baby in my arms. The point is, I feel like that was set up. The way it was set up, it was supposed to be set up for me to have children, the amount of children that I have. I can only, like, I can't really tell somebody how to get to that point, which when the gurus try to, which we were talking about yesterday, and I'm gonna use Muji as an example. Guru Muji on YouTube, Mooiji. Just Google it. You put it in search engine. Muji. He's a guru on YouTube, and he's always trying to get people to remember who self really is. And no matter what they say to him, they could talk about world hunger, world peace, he still keeps directing who is self. Because he knows that once you know self, you have the power to do all the things that you want to do. So he won't let them get sidetracked with who is, the other bullshit. Oh, I'm a mother, I'm a da-da-da-da. And he keeps telling them, that's not who you are. Look deeper. Who are you? Until he gets them to the point where they can see themselves. Like, you watched yourself grow up. You can recall those memories from your data collection in your mind. It's what is that? That's a fucking computer. But my point is, but then I started looking at him, which is contradictory to some people, because he's talking about the higher sense of I, which eliminates all the sources of ego, right? When you sit in silence and you don't think about your thoughts in your mind and you bullshit like that, and you really start connecting with sense of self and who I really is, in order for him to speak to you, he has to use his ego to do that. He has to put on his toga. He has to sit in the room. He has to put on that hat and play that role of guru. He knows that it's a role that he's playing, but it's hard to see that when you're so disconnected. You look at him like your ego is making you think that you're a guru to me. While you telling me to don't sit in words, don't use words, just sit in silence, you're using words to tell me that. Yes, it's very contradictory, but when I realized who self was, then I looked at him and I went, oh, well, if he knows what self is, then he knows that he has to play the role of guru to relate to somebody else. You have to come back into the ego to, it's so funny because now I could go in and out consciously. And at first it was like ego was sucking me back in. Oh, God, now I'm trapped in the world of my thoughts and my emotions and my feelings. Now there's always part of me that stands as the observer, and there's always part of me that stands in the truth of who I am. Because of those two reasons, there's a light bulb of inner peace, the same light bulb that people are looking for in the Bible. The peace that surpasses all understanding. Yes, I'm starting to understand where it is inside of me and how it's there. Sometimes the light isn't always as bright to others as it could be. And sometimes it's blazing to the point where it'll hurt your eyes. But for me, for my perception of self, it's always there. Because I know who self is. I know where self came from. I know where self going. I don't have that fear that other people have of not knowing who they are, not knowing why they're here, not knowing where they're going. That shit gets confusing. And you spend a whole years. People spend years going around and around the mulberry bush. Okay? So I'm going to stop this video and I'm going to do a part 2 because videos get kind of long. All right.